River Dance.
In our first hour, there's one simple question. Is Bigfoot real, or is it a myth? Is it possible that Bigfoot is an elusive primate, a prehistoric human, a spiritual being, or even an alien transplant?
For centuries, Native American tribes across the United States and Canada have their stories and legends about the elusive Bigfoot.
The term Bigfoot was coined in 1958 after a bulldozer driver named Jerry Crew found and then cast a large track at Bluff Creek, California, near the site where Roger Patterson and Bob Grimm later shot the famous Patterson Gremlin film in 1967.
And after that, the story of Bigfoot hit the Associated Press, keeping the legend of Sasquatch, a.k.a. Bigfoot, in our hearts and minds forever.
Well, today, famed investigators Tom Burnette and Rob Riggs are sharing their amazing adventures into the wild where Bigfoot is said to dwell. Hi, I'm Tony Sweet, host of On Air with Tony Sweet's Truth Be Told, right here on Universal Broadcasting Network. We welcome you to another broadcast of Truth Be Told, where we believe an experience becomes a truth.
I'm Walt Lusk, and today the show is sponsored by Conscious Life Expo and Adventures Unlimited Press. Go to ConsciousLifeExpo.com and get your 2015 tickets, and of course, you need to visit AdventuresUnlimitedPress.com and get your favorite books from all our guests right here on Truth Be Told.
Hi, everybody. I'm your Soul Intuitive co-host, Eddie Connor. And in the next 2 hours, we're going to take you on a journey across the globe from the gorgeous Smoky Mountains of my favorite state, North Carolina, to the swamplands of my least favorite state, Texas. In our second hour, we'll travel overseas to the land of the pharaohs, where famed author Ralph Ellis discusses how Jesus is in the bloodline of the ancient pharaohs of Egypt. But first, stick around because we want to share with you just a little bit more Bigfoot.
Be right back. Don't go anywhere. On Air with Tony Sweet, Truth Be Told.
Think of Bigfoot, and you probably picture that Sasquatch in the jerky commercials. Or, if you're old school, you may remember his bouts with the Bionic Man. But Rob Riggs knows him intimately. He's been on Bigfoot's trail for decades. He says the beast is real, alive and well, and living right here in Texas. That's this week's Inside Story from the pages of Houstonia.
Bigfoot roams throughout his forest land, feet twice the size of any man.
Bigfoot skeptics abound, but Rob Riggs is a believer. That's why he moved from the Kemah area out to the Big Thicket in East Texas. He says that's where the beasts live.
I have been investigating the Bigfoot phenomenon for over 30 years. I started in 1979 when I was working for a newspaper. I'm reluctant to use the word Bigfoot because I can't say for sure that what we're investigating here is the same animal that's seen in the Pacific Northwest. The animal around here, there's evidence that rather than walking upright like a man, it frequently walks on all fours.
What evidence is Rob talking about? Well, it's not as concrete as you might like.
I've interviewed a number of witnesses who've had, who had actual sightings.
But he's never seen one himself, though he has heard them.
On one of my outings when I was in the woods alone, I heard the thing howling. It sounded like a howler monkey on steroids. A combination of an African lion and a freight train, and an extremely long duration. Something's got to be making that howling sound. Something's got to be leaving footprints. Something's got to be doing it.
Rob's written a couple of books based on the many Bigfoot tales he's collected. He says folks around the Big Thicket are often hesitant to share their Bigfoot sightings, but Rob seems to attract them like mosquitoes.
I was probably 14, 15 years old. Two buddies of mine hunting, and something was up in a tree. It was big and black, and it jumped all the way across that pipeline into another tree.
few minutes later, that same fisherman stopped our interview, saying he'd just seen something down the road.
What'd you see?
Some big black animal.
That's the thing, man. You only get a fleeting glimpse.
Yep, a matter of seconds.
Had we missed our chance at finally finding Bigfoot? Rob says, nah, he'll keep searching.
It's not so much to go out in the woods to look for them. It's more like go out in the woods and make yourself accessible.
While Rob has never seen a Bigfoot in person, his co-author Tom Burnette says he has. He's even got the pictures to prove it. Take a look. This one sort of resembles a dog, and this one, well, kind of looks like a black bear's butt. But Rob sees eyes in it. Houstonia writer Michael Hardy is not so sure.
I would be mightily surprised to find an 8-foot-tall, 1,000-pound upright ape roaming through the woods of East Texas, being able to avoid photography.
Rob explains there's a reason for that.
I believe these animals have telepathic abilities. They're able to pick up on the intentionality of humans. And I think that we have that same ability, but we've lost, we don't use it anymore.
Bringing back that ability to mankind drives Rob Riggs. To read more on Rob's search for Bigfoot, pick up this month's issue of Houstonia.
Welcome back to On Air with Tony Sweets, Truth Be Told. Over the past 20 years, our first guests, Tom Burnette and Rob Riggs, have dedicated themselves to the search for Bigfoot, from the gorgeous Smoky Mountain in North Carolina to the swamplands of my next favorite state, Texas. Together, they reveal a huge collection of evidence that supports Bigfoot's existence, along with details of the creature's history, its habitats, and behaviors. All of this is in their book, Bigfoot, Exploring the Myth and Discovering the Truth.
All right, let's welcome the wonderful man that wrote the book. We're missing one at the moment, but we're going to have the other one hopefully here soon. We have Rob Riggs on the phone. Rob, how you doing?
Hey, Tony. Doing great.
Doing great. I'm so glad you're here. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, you're very welcome.
Well, we've been looking forward to this for a long time. I'll tell you, Eddie is a huge Bigfoot fan, and I know I am too. And Walt Lusk is here with us, and we're gonna have a good time with you.
I've been
guys.
a big fan for a long time, and have a real good friend of mine who's had a first-hand experience with one. So
I know.
There it is.
So first of all, I want to introduce you to everybody that's listening and going to be listening to our podcast at a later time. You've said you've never encountered an actual Bigfoot. Is that correct, or you have? I know Tom.
Well,
has.
I've never actually seen one.
Right.
But I think I have had a couple of close encounters. I know I've had one because I had the thing howl at me in the middle of the night. Or actually, it was just a couple hours before daylight, and there's no mistaking that howl.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I understand. It's a very, very unique sound.
And I know.
Yeah, it was so loud that it's indescribably loud, and it sent shockwaves literally.
Yes.
And it had to be within about 20 yards of me at that time.
Some feel that opens up a wormhole.
And I was actually out trying to find one, trying to have an encounter, and I got a little more than I bargained.
Oh. Some feel that shrieking sound that they make opens up a wormhole.
The dude showed up. Yeah.
Well, I'm also you're a semi-retired veteran of managing many Texas weekly newspapers. So your background is journalism, and so you're all about finding out the truth, and like we're doing is trying to find the truth and kind of spread the word to the people that are listening and make their minds up for themselves. And so, what was the first experience that really got you into doing the research of Bigfoot?
Well, Tony, the region of Texas where I live is it's called the Big Thicket. It's the southern end of the piney woods, which extend from East Texas all the way up into Carolinas. And I grew up in a very small town called Sour Lake. And there was a newspaper in the county seat nearby, a little town called Kountze, called the Kountze News. And when I was 7 years old, they started running stories about people having encountered what was described as a hairy wild man in the woods. Now, this was in 1952. That was some 6 years prior to the invention of the word Bigfoot out in California.
Right.
Nobody had ever heard that word. A lot of southern Bigfoots, some critics have dismissed them as kind of Bigfoot wannabes, but these sightings go way back to before Bigfoot was popularized. And so as a child, I heard those stories, and I was intrigued by them because I went camping out in the woods with my grandpa and my brother, and, you know, the idea of encountering something like that was intriguing to say the least. Well, I went off and graduated from high school and, you know, went to University of Texas and graduated. And I kind of got to where I dismissed the stories of the wild man as mere folklore. But then, as fate would have it, I took my first journalism job in that same newspaper that had earlier reported the wild man sightings when I was a kid. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to find out if people are still seeing anything like that, if there have been any subsequent sightings since in the 1950s. This was in like 1979 when I took that job. And so I ran a solicitation in the newspaper of just asking people if they had had any kind of unusual wildlife encounters that I would like to know about them. You know, not mentioning the wild man or anything of that type. I immediately started getting stories of people saying that they had seen what looked like an ape or a gorilla in the nearby woods. And so then I realized that those stories were still going on, and also realized that they probably had some relation to the stories coming from the West Coast about the large unidentified primates having been seen out there. So that's what got me started in it. I started gathering these stories, and over a period of actually decades, I gathered enough of them. I've actually written 3 books about this subject. And the more I get into it, Tony, the more subtle and mysterious I realize the whole phenomenon is.
Well, it does open a lot of doors for people, you know, because growing up, you know, in Kansas, and Eddie's actually from North Carolina. Walt, I think, were you from here?
Okay.
I'm from North Carolina originally as well.
It's Whale. But you know,
that's a nice state. I like North Carolina.
Yes,
beautiful.
We love
beautiful.
it.
Yes,
But you know, I've always heard, you know, Bigfoot always in the upper Northwest. I've never really heard of anything, you know, Texas or North Carolina.
Yeah.
And so, did you guys?
No. One of the things that Tom and I make clear is that we don't claim that what we've been studying is Bigfoot.
Oh, okay.
They could, to tell you the truth, the title of our book was the publisher's idea. You know, for purposes of sales.
Well, yeah,
but the deal is this: we think there are at least 2 unidentified primates in North America, and one of them would be the Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest, and the other one would be the southern Bigfoot. And we do think that the descriptions of them are slightly different.
In what way?
Pardon me?
In what way are the southern Bigfoot and the Pacific Northwest Bigfoot different, in your opinion, Rob?
Well, the western Bigfoot is generally described as bipedal, and the southern Bigfoot is described frequently as being a quadruped or going about on all 4s, at least part of the time, more like an ape and less like a human.
Oh, okay,
that makes sense.
And I also like to say that the western Bigfoot's probably more intelligent and more liberal, and votes Democrat.
Good point.
The
Good
Southern
point.
was more conservative,
Touche.
That's hilarious.
Touche.
And that's what's funny is when you ask people if they believe in Bigfoot, there's a lot of people that actually still do believe in Bigfoot, because it's almost like when you say UFO, because there's really no proof that there's not. And so I think the fantasy, the mystic or mystery of Bigfoot, of never being seen, never being not a lot of evidence, I think that's what intrigues people to constantly want to seek. And it's people like you that really take the time and going out into the field and make this possible for people like us that are just intrigued.
Right.
And so when
I tell you, I think there's a lot more encounters with unknown primates than people can even imagine. It's just that most of them go unreported. I was doing a piece for the Houston TV station, and I had a contact with a lady whose husband had seen a Bigfoot in the Big Thicket. And so we were trying to get a hold of her, and we couldn't find her, and her husband was out of town, and he was a truck driver and so on. And so I told the guy, I said, well, don't worry about it. I said, if we go out in the woods and we see anybody out there, if they're from this area, I said, I'll bet you that somebody in their family at one time or another has had an encounter. So we went out to this in the Big Thicket Preserve. It's part of the National Park System. And we ran across a family that was fishing from an old abandoned bridge on the bayou there. And I got to talking to him, and one guy was my age, and he was the grandpa, and there was, his kids and his grandkids. And so I get to talking to him, and I tell him what we're doing. I said, well, do you remember the Big Thicket wild man stories from years ago? He said, oh yeah, I remember those. And I said, well, have you ever seen anything like that around here, or heard anybody that? He says, no. He says my cousin said he thought he saw a bear. Now the bears are very rare in East Texas. He said he thought a bear from this very bridge here one time. And I said, well, he said it was a large hair covered animal. And I said, well, that's interesting. And then so we get to filming, and then later a guy comes up and says, wait a minute. He says, there was something one time. He says, me and my buddy were hunting on the pipeline right away. And he said, we had something treed. And he says, we didn't know what it was, but he says that thing was big, and it jumped from one tree to another.
Oh.
Without touching the ground. And he said, when that happened, we decided we didn't want to mess with it. And I said, well, what do you think that could have been? And he said, well, a bear couldn't do that. I said, no, it couldn't. No. And he says, well, it might have been one of them. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Now, he came from a family that had lived in the Big Thicket for generations. And that's typical. And after I wrote my book, when I first started gathering these stories, people were reluctant to talk about their sightings because they thought, they would be accused of being crazy or whatever.
Ridicule.
And over the years, people have really come forward with their experiences, and I know other Texas Bigfoot researchers, and they have gathered many sightings, and it's pretty much like that. I won't say all over the country, but in the areas where you would expect to find a large ape-like animal living in the woods, and that's going to be in the Pacific Northwest and in the South. Yeah. And what a lot of people don't realize is that there is as much forested land in the South as there is in the Pacific Northwest.
Absolutely.
About the same amount. Mm-hmm. And Texas, which nobody associates with trees, the eastern part of Texas is heavily forested.
That's pretty. See, I didn't even know that. I mean, I've been to Texas many times, but never to the east part.
Well, it all just looks like dirt when you're driving through.
Right.
Well, that's just El Paso.
It's basically between Houston and Louisiana.
Right.
That's where it's the most heavily forested. And if you get up north of I-10 a little ways, you run into what we call the Big Thicket. And the part of the Big Thicket where I live and where most of these stories were gathered is literally a jungle.
Yeah.
It's one of the only places in the United States outside of Florida that is botanically considered to be a jungle-like country.
Wow, that is remarkable.
That's amazing.
Well, I want to go back a little bit, and when you started writing the book, Bigfoot, and you said the editor wanted you to title it Bigfoot, but I love the other part of it. It says exploring the myth and discovering the truth. I want to know, when you and Tom Burnette, were you guys friends before you started writing this book, or no?
No, what happened is my first book came out in 2001, and I had continued with my research, and then I came out with a book in 2005 that actually I was a contributor to, called Weird Texas. and I reported on some more stories and stuff that I'd collected in that time. And my sister, her name was Renee, and who had helped with my research over the years and been involved with it, she happened to move to North Carolina. And she was visiting a gift shop in Black Mountain, North Carolina, and happened to see a copy of Tom Burnette's first book called Nature's Secret Agents. And she bought the book and called me and said, "Hey, I found this book. You need to read it." And I said, "Well, why?" She says, "Well, it's what he described in here is very similar to what you have described in East Texas." And now the significant part, and this is where Tom and I are kind of unique, is that we associate the Bigfoot sightings with mystery light forms that occur in the same areas where the Bigfoot do.
And will you define what that is for Tony's audience? What the mystery light forms are?
Yeah, define that for us.
Yeah, well, there are certain places, and this happens all over the world, but let's just say in North America or in the United States, where these balls of light occur, and have done so periodically for years. You may have heard of the Marfa Lights in West Texas.
I have, yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of them, but it's called the standing ghost light phenomenon. And there's places in California and Washington, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, that have these lights, and they've been studied scientifically. And I've even was participated in a study by a team of physicists who came here from Japan to investigate a light that has appeared down here in Big Thicket for as long as anybody can remember, and it's come to be called the Bragg light because it's most frequently seen on an old abandoned road, 8-mile road that runs through the woods in a very isolated area, and people have seen it there for years. Well, it's really interesting that many of these same ghost light locations, if the surrounding area is a suitable habitat for what one would expect of an ape-like creature, many of those places also have Bigfoot sightings. Tom lives just a few miles as the crow flies from a very famous ghost light in North Carolina called the Brown Mountain Light. And I bet your buddy there's heard of that.
Hello.
Have you, Eddie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, see, the Brown Mountain Light is one of the ghost lights. Then you got them in Florida and Louisiana and Arkansas. There's a place called Gurdon, Gurdon, and they have the ghost light similar to the Bragg light in East Texas. And I got an email from a gentleman who lived there in Gurdon, and he was retired police officer and had been in the military, and he told me that he was out on the deer stand one night, and he heard a hog howling, screech, like it was in pain or something. He went to investigate, and he got a glimpse of an ape, escaping or avoiding him. And the next morning he found the remains of that pig stuck up in a tree.
Wow.
And
Lord.
with its guts ripped out.
Huh.
And he said there wasn't any question in his mind, but that was some kind of an ape that he saw. And so I explained to him, I said, well, you're in the Garden Lights area. And see, what Tom and I think is that these lights represent some kind of naturally occurring geomagnetic anomalies. Okay? And that somehow they are, they could be, they could, well, I'm having trouble trying to verbalize this, but that somehow these naturally occurring magnetic phenomena are creating vortices of energy
vortexes
that can open portals to parallel realities.
That's great.
Well,
Wow.
so are you saying this is causation or correlation?
Pardon me?
Are you saying this is causation or correlation?
I think it's more correlation than causation.
Okay.
Now, here's what's interesting to me. Have y'all read the Skinwalker material?
I have not read it, but
Skinwalker Ranch.
Right.
Have you heard of that?
I'm vaguely familiar with it, but I don't know the specifics of it.
Okay, well, that was written by a guy named Kelleher, and I forget what his co-author's name was, but it was about a place in Utah where all this weird stuff was happening. Okay, weird lights, weird animals, UFOs, cattle mutilations, and so on.
Well, Utah's a weird state to start with.
Pardon me?
Utah's a weird state to start with.
Yeah. And so they went, there was a gentleman in Nevada, in Las Vegas, who set up a fund rather a foundation to fund research into what they call discovery science. They call it the National Institute of Discovery Science. And what he did is he got together a group of scientists, and this Dr. Kelleher was one of them, and they went and investigated this place. And it turned out there had been a long history of this happening in this particular area of Utah. UFOs, weird lights, just all kind of bizarre stuff. And so they went there, and sure enough, they verified that. They even had the scientists even had common experiences. I mean, there'd be 4 or 5 of them. Something weird like would happen. They would see something. They'd all see the same thing, or they'd hear an animal howl, and they heard the Bigfoot howl as it was described. Yeah, what I experienced, and so interestingly, after 2 years of study, even though they had these experiences and saw this stuff, they didn't have any data that they could present to a board of scientists to review. And my response to that is that because they were trying to reduce everything they were seeing to a materialistic model.
Yep. Yep.
And you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Yeah, materialistic model of reality when it may be something far weirder than that.
Yeah.
And this Dr.
dimension.
Kelleher, that's basically what he deduced after all of his research, is that what all this was representing is that there are levels of reality that are not accessible to our normal experimental science.
Absolutely.
And if you're just And Rob,
Pardon me?
Rob, I'm going to ask you
Yes.
a question just a second, but if you're just tuning in, you're listening to On Air with Tony Sweet, and the name of the show is Truth Be Told.
Yeah, and you're listening to an amazing guy that is the author, or kind of half of the book. Co-author of the book Bigfoot, and his name is Rob Riggs, calling in from Texas.
And if you're just tuning in, if you're just now tuning in, Rob is talking to us about vortexes and some Japanese scientists that had come in to study that in Utah and some other phenomenon. And what I was going to ask you is the vortex that you're speaking about, or this phenomenon in and of itself, Native Americans have talked about for centuries.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Well, see, the problem is that Westerners, we always try to go in and look at this stuff from that materialistic model.
Yeah.
We always try to reduce it down to, something physical, whereas the Native Americans didn't have that problem.
That's right.
Right.
Most indubitably.
Yeah.
Right. Well, one thing I was going to ask you about, when in your book you have a chapter that says, "Does Bigfoot have psychic or paranormal powers?" Well,
right.
Do you think this is one reason that a lot of people not a lot of people, most people do not get pictures or even get close enough because they already can predict and they know how to.
They're 10 steps ahead of
yes.
humans.
So give us the.
Well, exactly. I think that's exactly the reason. And the thing is, when I'm sorry, restate that question again. I lost my train of thought.
No, I just want to know in the book about the psychic.
About the psychic powers. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the Bigfoot mystery boils down to this: if they're real, why can't we find them?
Right.
And the answer is something that humans aren't comfortable with, and it's that we're not in control; they are. You go out in the woods, like around here in the Big Thicket, and you get out in the dense woods, and you can't see anything past about 20 feet from you.
If you're lucky.
And so you're in an environment that human beings are not used to operating in. And a Bigfoot could be literally within 20 feet of you, and you never see it because they know how to blend into their surroundings. And part of it is because I do believe that they have some kind of psychic sensitivity, and this is no big mystery because we experience that all the time ourselves. We just don't pay any attention to it. Are you familiar with the research in England where they've done the animal sheldrake?
No, I'm not.
Sheldrake.
Well, Eddie, he's a psychic himself, so he may. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
intuitive.
Yeah, he's an intuitive over here.
But tell us about the study in England.
Yeah, I want to hear that.
Fascinating with the
Very
yeah, well, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, he's the one that came up with the idea of the morphic fields.
Yes.
But he has been experimenting with animal telepathy for years. And he said he wrote a famous book that dogs who know when their masters are coming home.
Yep.
Yeah.
You familiar with that?
Oh,
yeah.
yes,
And
yes.
so basically, what he demonstrated, and he would take these cases and run the numbers and so on, and it's like the chances of the results they were getting being just chance were phenomenally insignificant. He deduced that animals have the animals communicate telepathically, and that this is a normal thing in nature.
Yes.
And that a human being can have a very strong bond with a pet, for example,
Right.
and it creates a kind of a psychic bond. Now, the way he explains this is kind of interesting. We think of telepathy as thoughts of reading somebody's mind, and basically we boil that down to words.
Yep.
Whereas animals, they don't think in those terms. They're more like in pictures and feelings.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying? So
Right,
you go out in the woods and you have the intention that a Bigfoot is suspicious of. You're going to broadcast that to them with your thoughts your feelings and your intentionality. And I think they're very sensitive to that. They pick it up.
Well, and also humans.
As part of their defense mechanism. Pardon me?
And also adult humans, the older they get, the more dumbed down they are in their ability to have an intention and to feel good or to even have certain pictures in their mind. And the big feet, big feet. You have big feet, Rob. And the Bigfoot, as you're talking about, that's their domain. That's what's familiar to them. And they're just pure positive energy, for lack of a better way to say it. And you're right. They could be 5 feet from you probably. Unless you smelled it, you wouldn't even know it was there.
Right. Well, the other thing is they also have natural camouflaging ability just with their coat, with the they have long shaggy hair, which is basically works like a ghillie suit. Wow. You ever seen a hunter in a ghillie suit?
Oh yeah.
When I've seen my grandma,
it blends in with the background, and the Bigfoot's coat does that naturally. And so I would say that's their first line of camouflage. But it gets into the subtle areas of they're picking up your intentionality and so on. So when you go looking for one, you're broadcasting. Mm-hmm. You're making noise. They can pick it up. Like if you were down here in these palmetto flats and down in the Big Thicket, you'd be making so much noise walking through there, they could hear you from a mile away.
Oh, I'm sure.
Well, and the other thing, too, if they wanted to really do you any harm, they're not going to have any issue or any problem doing that just for that very reason. But it seems like there's fewer people, quote, attacked, as it were. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I do think that they are capable of being territorial and just like a lot of animals, if the male's in rut or if a female has young with her and you're kind of getting into their territory, I think they might get a little hostile. Yeah. I'll give you an example of this. Now, this is kind of interesting. One of the stories that I collected when I put up that solicitation in the Kountze News, one of the stories I got was from this couple, and they had gone out to the Bragg Road to look for that ghost light. Now, the ghost light's very well known in this entire region, and people go out there to try to have that experience of seeing something, bizarre. So they were out there on the ghost road, and she says something looked like a big ape jumped on the hood of their pickup.
Oh, hell no.
Yeah. And so her boyfriend, of course, this is East Texas, and he had a deer rifle on his gun rack in his pickup. Shotgun. He takes it down and shoots the thing right through the windshield.
Oh, wow!
Hello.
Yeah, and she said all it did was take off howling out into the woods, and she said it scared the blazes out of him. And she said, "Mister, if you want to, you come see this." He said, "We got the windshield fixed, but the claw marks of that thing are still on our hood."
Did it actually bleed?
Apparently not. I don't think they saw any blood. Now, so that was incident number one, and this is on Bragg Road.
Wow. On
the Ghost Light Road. And at first I was kind of suspicious of that story, the fact that someone had gone there to see the ghost light and then, the Bigfoot shows up. That was one of the first instances where I started getting that correlation, kind of tightening up. Well, so then years later, my book comes out. I'm on a show like this. Guy calls up and he says, "Well," he said, "me and my girlfriend were going to some church function in Houston, and they were on their way back to Beaumont, and they were driving through Saratoga, and they said, well, let's go see the ghost light. That's the fun thing to do." They go out there, and they're sitting in their car waiting to see the ghost light, and he said this thing come up from behind them and grabbed the bumper of his car and started picking it up.
Wow.
and dropping it.
Wow.
Yeah. And he says we saw that thing. He said it was huge, and it's so naturally it scared them. That's number two. That's the second case I heard of where the Bigfoot was aggressive. Okay. Then here recently, a kid came to a book signing I had at the library in Sour Lake. And he said about 4 years ago, again, he and some of his buddies went out to the Ghost Road, Bragg Road, looking for the ghost light. Again, all of them being very innocent and thinking it's just a kind of fun thing to do. And he says they were sitting there and they heard something approaching them from the rear of the truck. And he said the only way I can describe it is the way it was so loud. Its steps were. It was something very heavy, so it kind of scared him. So he tells the driver, says, "Let's get out of here." Well, before the driver could, hello.
Oh, we're here.
Yeah, we're here.
We're just
okay.
intrigued.
Before the driver could get going very fast, the thing caught up with him.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And he said that he kept telling the driver, says, speed up. And he said he saw the thing, but it was a real dark night, and the thing was real black. And he said it jumped for them, and its hands caught the tailgate of the
Truck.
and he said it left a dent in the tailgate of the truck. Now that's 3 instances, pretty much in the same place over a long period of time. So my theory is that there's probably an old male Bigfoot, and that road is part of its territory. And if you happen to be there at the wrong time, he takes it as a hostile, as being hostile, and he defends his territory.
I was going to say, it sounds like he doesn't like the automobiles. Is what he does.
And also, just based on what we just learned today, too, Rob, it sounds like if the ghost lights are actually connected to vortex energy, that is a really sacred place for the Bigfoot, as it were. And as people are coming there to see that, their intention really is on the ghost light. And so they're going to have a pure desire to bump into a Bigfoot, even if it's by accident. But it feels like the vortex, the ghost light, the Bigfoot, all connected. And like you're saying, it's super territorial. And that would freak my freak.
It would freak.
Well, now who's speaking here?
That's Eddie.
I'm Eddie. Hi.
Are you, Eddie? You're the psychic, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, what you just said is a very profound statement. And I think you're right, because one of the traditions of the Native Americans is that the Bigfoot there is there to protect the sacred places.
Wow!
And the sacred places for the Native Americans are the areas where they can contact the spirit world.
Yes,
I love that.
Absolutely, yes.
It makes sense. It really does make sense.
It all fits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, now what does that mean? Contact the spirit world. Well, see, the idea is that these places, like in Utah, is that the same range of phenomena that occurred at the Skinwalker Ranch occurs in the Big Thicket, occurs in all these places where these ghost lights are. People will see weird lights in the sky, then they'll see UFOs, then they'll see the Bigfoot, and there's a sequence of phenomena that all occur in these same kind of localized places. Now, what my theory is, and I think this goes along with the Native American traditions, is that what those places are, they're places for whatever reason, the magnetic fields become intensified according to some periodicity that we haven't figured out. But when those places are intensified, when the energy is spiked in those areas, it opens up to other realities.
Yes.
Yeah.
It opens up these portals to other realities, and so I think and when that happens, who knows what all can happen in those places? Like, a lot of people want to think that all those phenomena are just phases of the same energy. For example, I don't know if y'all are familiar with John Keel, the Mothman prophecies, and Eighth Tower, and so on. But he was a paranormal investigative writer from about 40 years ago, and he wrote some amazing books. And he basically thought that all these weird phenomena were what he called transmogrifications of the same energy field, same energy. They were just appearances. The Bigfoot and the UFOs and so on weren't really real. They were just appearances projected by this energy. And when I wrote my first book, I basically was agreeing with Mr. Keel and was actually trying to establish the Big Thicket as one of those areas. He called them window areas, where these phenomena would occur. Yeah, and I was just trying to establish the fact that the Big Thicket region was one of those areas. Now, after that, at that time, I thought he was right, and that the Bigfoot were basically spectral, like a ghost or something, that they weren't physically real, or that they could only exist under certain magnetic conditions or something. Now, this is something that Dr. Persinger has that theory, and he also had seen the parallel between the weird lights and the ape creatures. Mr. Keel and Dr. Persinger, they both established that, and I was basically trying to corroborate their theories. But over the years, I have come to think that the Bigfoot is an actual physical animal. That I have met enough Bigfoot researchers and have been impressed by the material that they've collected to see that much of their evidence suggests the normal day-to-day survival activities of an actual physical animal. But I don't think I think there's a possibility that they're actually from a parallel world and only enter this world for specific reasons, and that they're capable of going back. And this is exactly what the Native Americans say.
Yes.
Yep. Well, my understanding is that, for example, the big scream sound that they make, they may be opening up a vortex, and that's how they're able to get away when people see them, is that they go to a different dimension.
Wow.
And the other part of it is that howl.
Well, now, who just said, was that you, Eddie?
No, that was
Walt.
Was
that
Walt.
You who just said?
My name's Walt.
Yeah.
So the howl itself is setting up an energy that opens up. That's really interesting.
Yes, I've heard that.
My experience of it is that it was more than just a sound.
See?
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
Well, and that's why when people hear the noise, that sound, then all of a sudden they can't find them. They're nowhere to be seen or anywhere, is because they've actually gone into a different dimension.
And created a frequency that is the way they traverse between physical and non-physical.
The frequency, exactly.
Yeah, and the thing is this: these other things, the ghost lights and the UFOs, may be completely different entities that are able to access the same
frequency,
vortices or portals. Yes,
could very well be.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
I want to ask you this because we have about I can't believe it's already about 8 minutes left before we have to let you go. But we definitely want to have you back.
Definitely
yes.
Tom. back.
Yes,
we'd love to get Tom back.
Yeah,
on
we're just touching the surface.
I know, right?
We're just getting.
Well, it's for the listeners. It's more of a tease, so we'll have to come back the next time.
Just getting warmed up.
But here's the thing: is I know when I spoke with Tom on the phone a week ago, he was also talking about the government knowing the truth. Why do you think the government does know the truth but not sharing it with us? Why do you think that would be?
Well, I personally don't have a lot to say about that because everybody has their conspiracy theories and their cover-up theories. It's speculation on my. I just want to deal with what I can observe,
right,
and what I can logically deduce. I don't know why the government would want to cover it up unless they thought it was going to affect land use or something like that. But I'm not. Frankly, I am not real paranoid about government conspiracies.
Well, that's what I've heard on a couple of documentaries and films that I've watched about Bigfoot. They said because if Bigfoot is real, then there would be the government would have to step in and save these creatures, and then it would destroy
that's true. Where I live here in the Big Thicket, there was 50 years of the conservationists struggling with the lumber industry and the oil industry about preserving some of the land.
Right.
Yep.
And so if we prove that there were Bigfoot living in the Big Thicket, there'd be a lot of pressure to preserve a whole lot more land, and there could be interests who were opposed to that, and that could influence the government. So that I could see that, yes.
Yeah, and I think that probably is true, because I remember they were talking about, and this is still on the subject, but I think it was a spotted owl that they thought.
They just spotted owl. I was just going to say.
And they destroyed the lumber industry for a long time.
I got you. Yeah.
The spotted owl toasted it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They might be related to the spotted owl.
If there is conspiracy, I would say it was coming from that kind of concern.
Well,
but, getting back to this portal thing, how weird all this gets. I have a good friend, Nick Redfern. Have y'all ever interviewed Nick?
No, not yet. Anyway, we're going to have to write his name down.
A bunch of books of paranormal stuff. He lives in Dallas, but he's from England. But he wrote a book, and he referred to me introducing him. He used to live down here in southeast Texas, and I took him out and introduced him to the Big Thicket, and he knew about ghost lights, but I just showed him, around here.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a book called "There's Something in the Woods," and somebody contacted him and said that he had been in the Army, stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is right across the border from Texas,
not far,
and that he got sent out on a detail to go to Bragg, an area in the Big Thicket, was with a detail to retrieve what they suspected of being a crashed UFO.
Oh wow!
He says, he says they go over there to get it, and the place where they found it was literally like a quarter mile from the Ghost Road. Whoa. So there's the vortex, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
And he said they retrieved the thing, and it was like a big kind of metal-looking ball. And he said he saw them. They sent in people with hazmat suits. They loaded it onto a truck, and they took it off to Fort Hood, Texas. And so he goes back to Fort Polk, and he says a friend of his who was somehow involved in it contacts him, and he says, well, what it was is that the government thought that it was a probe from another planet or another dimension, and they used a portal to access this world.
There you go.
Fascinating.
There it is.
And, yeah, no kidding. And so you see how all this kind of
fits together.
Oh, it's totally
together.
Yeah. It's literally linked and
layered.
It makes total sense. And
Absolutely
the reason we love to do these shows, Rob, is because we do believe, with truth be told, that once you have an experience, then obviously your perception completely changes as a result of it. And everybody, most people, when they hear about Bigfoot, they think of the big hairy monster that lives out in certain parts of the woods and certain parts of the world.
Right.
And then what you're bringing to the table is so much more than that. We've learned about the hows and the frequencies.
Right.
We've learned about the vortexes and the portals between worlds, and how this is not a, quote, weird, unusual thing, that multidimensionality beings have always existed. And it makes sense that the Bigfoot would have all these extra powers and stuff in association with what Native Americans and most awake people who are instinctual or intuitive and love the planet Earth and want to make sure it's taken care of. We all know about these sorts of things, and you have married them all together in a way that most listeners would have never, ever put one and one together. So
great job.
Well, what this is all about is teaching us about reality,
and to think outside the box.
We basically live in this trance state of what I call the modern urban culture.
Right.
Yep.
And it's created a trance at where we've lost touch with nature.
Yep.
Yes, indeed.
And our potential contacts with other realities. So I think you're right.
Wow.
And it's it's kind of in some ways it's really affected me, because like I go to the university and I want to get a PhD and so on. And the more I learned about this stuff, the more I realized, man, these people don't know what they're talking about.
That's right.
There's stuff going on.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
I couldn't get a PhD in philosophy because they didn't know what the hell was going on.
That's exactly right. And Rob, you're one of the people that are on the leading edge, and you're bringing this information to the mass consciousness, and you're doing it in a really friendly,
absolutely conversational way.
Yeah, in a feel-good way. So we all support you in it. Now,
definitely. Rob
Riggs' book is called Bigfoot: Exploring the Myth and Discovering the Truth, and we really do want you to come back to Truth Be Told.
We know you're
definitely I don't know what happened to Tom, but he might have been confused about the
time difference,
the time zones. Yeah, he might have been confused about that.
Well, you guys are both going to come back, and make sure you check them out on their website at bigfootthebigpicture.net. You can look at the other books. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Tony. Your readers might they might be interested in my other book too, called In the Big Thicket: On the Trail of the Wild Man. It gives a lot of background information about the ghost lights.
Ooh. No, that's great. That's great. Right. And don't forget about Weird Texas. We gotta get that book too.
That's right.
And
Weird Texas.
Yeah.
But we want you to come back again. I'll give you a call. We'll get it scheduled so we can. We have a lot more to discuss with this. And before we get out of here, we're going to end with one of the last chapters in your book. Where do we go from here? And so where do we go from here when it comes to the research with you and other...
Okay, well, I think the first thing we need to do is look at our research models.
That's right.
And, why are there so many Bigfoot research groups that have not collected any more data than they have over the last 30 years,
right.
When this has become popular? What's going on with that? And I think it's because... of their intentionality. Most of these outfits, they'll go into an area where there's been a Bigfoot sighting, and it's almost like a military invasion.
Yep.
They go in with all their equipment and stuff, and all that does is alert the Bigfoot and tell them to stay away.
Absolutely.
They might play with them. The Bigfoot might mess with them just to, for whatever reason. But they ain't going to sting one,
right.
No,
I would love to just catch that on tape just to watch him playing around with him.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so
I think you're right, Rob.
I think the whole setup of the research has to change. And what Tom and I have advocated is what we call the habituation model, and that is where you get them, you attract them to you. Instead of you going out trying to run one down, you go to an area where you know they exist and have existed over a period of time, and you plant yourself there, and you wait on them, and you try to attract them. You try to make friends with them, so to speak. Yeah. And Tom's done that more than anybody that I've ever heard of.
Well, my mother always says it's easier to get bees with honey.
He's done that more successfully.
As my mother says, it's easier to get bees with honey than vinegar.
He has some amazing pictures.
Wow.
There you go.
And that's something we need to talk about on another.
Of course.
Interview.
No, you're coming back, and unfortunately we're out of time. But we want to give you an applause for taking the time out. And please tell Tom that we didn't forget him, and we want to have you guys both back. And please. Everybody support Tom and Rob in their journey in the research, because I know people like us, we're learning so much from you, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome, man. This is an exciting time to be alive when it comes to all this stuff.
Absolutely, it is.
Amen to that. All right, brother. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Rob.
All right.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
All right. Take care. All right. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we have our next guest calling in from the UK. Yes, all the way over to the UK. And we're going to be talking about, is Jesus really the great-grandson of Cleopatra?
Oh, we're going to find out.
We are going to find out right after this break. So don't go anywhere on Ever Tony Sweet. Truth be told, here's a little ancient Egyptian music. Enjoy.